The gunshot echoed through the narrow canyon as Victoria Nicholls dropped to her knees, her trembling hands clutching the wound in her brother's chest. Blood seeped between her fingers as the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty trail outside of Skidoo, California, a place that had promised new beginnings but now threatened to become her final resting place. "Stay with me, Thomas," she begged, her voice cracking as her brother's eyes fluttered, life draining from them with each passing second. "Please, you cannot leave me alone out here." But the ruthless desert had already claimed him, just as it had claimed so many others who'd ventured to this unforgiving territory in 1878. Victoria's shoulders shook with silent sobs as she looked around desperately. The stagecoach and its driver lay in ruins several yards away, victims of the same bandits who had shot her brother and fled with their meager possessions. Victoria hadn't wanted to come west. It had been Thomas's idea after their parents died of typhoid back in Boston. A new life, he had promised, gold and opportunity. But all she'd found was death and desolation. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her heart seize with terror. Had the bandits returned? With nowhere to hide and no weapon to defend herself, Victoria closed her eyes and held her brother tighter, preparing for whatever fate awaited her. "Miss, you hurt." The deep voice carried concern rather than threat. Victoria opened her eyes to see a tall man dismounting from a chestnut stallion, his movements fluid despite his imposing frame. He wore a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face, but she could see the concern in his blue eyes as he approached cautiously. "Bandits," she managed to say. They killed everyone." The stranger knelt beside her, his weathered hands gently moving to check her brother's pulse. After a moment, he shook his head. "I'm sorry, miss, he's gone." Fresh tears spilled down Victoria's dirt-streaked face. "He was all I had left." The man stood and surveyed the scene, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. "Name's August Mackenzie. Most folks call me Gus. I ranch about 10 miles from here." He extended a hand toward her. "We need to get you someplace safe before those bandits circle back or the scavengers start coming for the bodies." Victoria looked at her brother's face, peaceful now despite the violence that had claimed him. "I cannot leave him here. We'll come back for him, I promise. But right now, you're in danger staying out in the open." His voice was firm but gentle. Victoria tried to stand but found her legs buckling beneath her. The shock, the heat, and the grief had taken their toll. "I'm not strong enough," she whispered, collapsing back to the ground. The cowboy said, "You don't have to be, I am." In one swift motion, he lifted her into his arms and carried her to his horse. "But Thomas," she protested weakly. "I'll come back for him before sundown," August promised as he settled her onto his saddle. "You have my word." As they rode away from the scene of the massacre, Victoria clung to the stranger's solid form, her mind numb with grief and fear. The unfamiliar terrain passed in a blur of sand and scrub brush, the relentless sun beating down on them as August guided his horse along a barely discernible trail. Victoria had never felt so alone, so utterly lost. Yet somehow, the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves and the unwavering strength of the cowboy carrying her offered a sliver of hope in the midst of her despair. August's ranch appeared on the horizon as the sun began its descent, a modest house with a large barn and corral nestled against a backdrop of rugged mountains. Two ranch hands looked up from their work as August rode in with Victoria, their expressions curious but respectful. "Frank Miguel," August called out, "there's been a stagecoach robbery on the North Trail. I need you to take the wagon and bring back the bodies. One of them is this lady's brother." The men nodded grimly and immediately began preparing the wagon. August carried Victoria into the house, setting her gently on a worn but clean sofa. "Rest here. I'll fetch some water and something to eat." Left alone, Victoria took in her surroundings. The ranch house was simple but comfortable, with practical furniture and few decorations. A bookshelf caught her eye. It was filled with volumes of poetry, history, and science, an unexpected sight in a frontier home. August returned with a cup of water and a plate of bread and jerky. "It's not much, but it'll give you strength." "When's the last time you ate?" Victoria couldn't remember. "Yesterday morning, I think, before we left the last station." "Eat slowly," he advised, pulling a chair across from her. "I need to ask you some questions about what happened." As Victoria sipped the water, she recounted the attack, how the stagecoach had been forced to stop by fallen rocks in the road, how men with bandanas covering their faces had appeared with guns drawn, demanding valuables. "Thomas tried to protect me," she said, her voice breaking. "One of them grabbed at my necklace, my mother's locket, and Thomas pushed him away. That's when they shot him." August's jaw tightened. "How many were there?" "4, I think. Their leader had a scar across his cheek. They took everything, our money, our luggage." "The Blackwell gang," August said grimly. "They've been terrorizing the territory for months now. Sheriff can't catch them, or won't." "Will you report this to him?" August's expression darkened. "Sheriff Daniels and I don't see eye to eye, but yes, I'll ride into town tomorrow." Victoria set down her cup, suddenly overcome with the reality of her situation. "I have nothing left, no money, no belongings, no family." Fresh tears threatened to fall. "I don't know what to do." "You can stay here until you figure things out," August said without hesitation. "I have a spare room. It's nothing fancy, but it's yours for as long as you need it." Victoria regarded him warily. "Why would you help a stranger this way?" "Because out here, helping others isn't kindness, it's survival," he replied simply. "I've been where you are, alone, scared. Someone helped me once. I'm just passing it forward." Before Victoria could respond, the sound of a wagon approaching interrupted them. August rose and went to the door. "They're back with your brother. I'll help them prepare him properly." Victoria followed him outside on unsteady legs. The ranch hands had returned with 3 bodies covered in canvas in the back of the wagon. She stood by as August and his men carefully lifted Thomas's body and carried it to a small shed near the house. "We'll build a proper coffin," August told her softly. "And tomorrow, we can lay him to rest on the hill behind the house, if that's acceptable to you. It's a peaceful spot." The simple dignity of his offer broke through Victoria's shock, and she began to sob in earnest. August stood awkwardly for a moment before placing a hesitant hand on her shoulder. "I know it doesn't seem like it now, but you will find your strength again," he said quietly. "Until then, you're not alone." That night, in the small bedroom August had provided, Victoria lay awake staring at the ceiling. The events of the day played over and over in her mind like some terrible nightmare. Yet amid the horror, the image of August Mackenzie carrying her away from danger, promising her she didn't have to be strong alone, gave her an anchor in the storm of her grief. Morning arrived with the crow of a rooster and the smell of coffee and frying bacon. Victoria dressed in the same travel-worn clothes she'd arrived in and made her way to the kitchen. August stood at the stove, his broad shoulders filling the small space as he turned bacon in a cast-iron skillet. "Good morning," he said, glancing over his shoulder. "Hungry?" Victoria nodded, taking a seat at the simple wooden table. "I want to thank you for your kindness yesterday. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along." August shrugged off her gratitude as he placed a plate before her. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," she said firmly. "They wouldn't have. Most would have taken what little the bandits left behind and ridden on." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Maybe you're right. Eat your breakfast. We have a difficult day ahead." After breakfast, August led Victoria to the shed where Thomas's body lay in a simple pine coffin the ranch hands had constructed overnight. Frank, a weathered man with kind eyes, stood respectfully to the side holding his hat. "I cleaned him up best I could, miss," he said. "Miguel's digging the grave up on the hill." "Thank you," Victoria whispered, her voice barely audible. August touched her elbow gently. "Would you like a few minutes alone with him?" Victoria nodded, and the men stepped outside. She approached the coffin slowly, her heart aching as she gazed upon her brother's face for the last time. Thomas looked peaceful, almost as if he were sleeping, the violence of his death erased by careful hands. "What am I to do now, Thomas?" she whispered, stroking his cold cheek. "You were so certain this would be our new beginning, but I am alone in a strange place with nothing but the clothes on my back." No answer came, of course. Victoria had never felt so utterly lost. Yet somewhere deep within, a tiny spark of determination flickered. Thomas had always believed in her strength, even when she doubted herself. When she emerged from the shed, August was waiting, his stallion and a smaller bay mare saddled and ready. "I thought you might want to ride up rather than walk," he explained. "It's not far, but the hill is steep." Victoria eyed the mare nervously. "I've never ridden before." "She's gentle as a lamb," August assured her. "I'll lead her myself." The small funeral procession made its way up the hill, August leading Victoria's mare, followed by Frank and Miguel carrying the coffin. At the top, a grave had been dug beneath a gnarled oak tree that offered shade from the relentless sun. The view stretched for miles across the valley, rugged mountains rising in the distance. "It's beautiful here," Victoria said softly as August helped her dismount. "Best spot on the ranch," he agreed. "You can see clear to Skidoo on a clear day." They laid Thomas to rest with simple dignity. Victoria read a passage from the Bible that August had provided, her voice growing stronger as she spoke the familiar words of comfort. When she finished, August and his men filled the grave and placed a wooden cross at its head. "I'll have a proper marker made in town," August told her as they stood looking at the mound of fresh earth. "What would you like it to say?" Victoria considered for a moment. "Thomas Nicholls, beloved brother, seeker of new beginnings." August nodded approvingly. "A good epitaph." As they rode back down the hill, Victoria felt a strange sense of peace mingled with her grief. Thomas was gone, but he had been laid to rest with dignity, in a beautiful place far from the dusty trail where he had fallen. Back at the ranch house, August prepared to ride into Skidoo. "I need to report the attack to the sheriff, for whatever good it will do. I'll also see about getting you some proper clothes and necessities." "I have no money to repay you," Victoria said, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. "Consider it a loan until you get on your feet," August replied, his tone brooking no argument. "Is there anything specific you need?" Victoria thought about her lost luggage, the carefully packed dresses and personal items that represented her former life. "Just the basics, and perhaps some paper and a pencil. I used to teach back east, and writing helps me think." Something flickered in August's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or interest. "A teacher. What did you teach?" "Literature and composition at a girls' school in Boston," she replied. He nodded thoughtfully. "Skidoo could use a teacher. Most of the children here get little formal education." The idea planted a small seed of possibility in Victoria's mind. Perhaps there was a way forward after all. After August left for town, Victoria explored the ranch house more thoroughly. It was larger than it had first appeared, with 3 bedrooms, a study lined with bookshelves, and a spacious kitchen. Everything was clean but utilitarian, clearly the home of a man who valued function over appearance. In the study, she examined the bookshelves more closely. They contained volumes of poetry Whitman, Tennyson, and Burns alongside practical manuals on cattle ranching, medicine, and law. August Mackenzie, it seemed, was a man of unexpected depth. Victoria found herself drawn to a small desk by the window. Papers were neatly stacked, and a leather-bound journal lay open, a pen resting across its pages. She resisted the urge to read what was written there, but noticed a sketch in the margin, a detailed rendering of the view from the hill where Thomas now rested. The sound of hooves in the yard pulled her attention away. Expecting August's return, she was surprised to see a woman dismounting from a spotted mare. Victoria stepped onto the porch as the visitor approached. "You must be the woman Gus found yesterday," the woman said without preamble. She was perhaps 40, with streaks of gray in her dark hair and eyes that missed nothing. "I'm Eleanor Whitman. I run the general store in Skidoo with my husband. Gus stopped by and mentioned you might need some things." Victoria was momentarily taken aback by the woman's directness but quickly recovered. "Yes, I'm Victoria Nicholls. It's very kind of you to come." Eleanor waved off her thanks. "Kindness has nothing to do with it. We take care of our own out here. I've brought some clothes that might fit you and a few other necessities." She handed Victoria a bundle wrapped in brown paper. "I don't know how to repay this generosity," Victoria said, accepting the package. Eleanor's expression softened slightly. "Gus said you were a teacher back east." "Is that right?" "Yes, literature and composition." "Well, there's your answer then. Skidoo desperately needs someone to teach the children. Most can barely write their names, and the last school teacher left 6 months ago after deciding frontier life wasn't to her liking." Victoria felt a small flutter of hope. "Do you think the town would hire me? We don't stand on formality here. If you're willing to teach, the parents will make sure you're compensated." Eleanor eyed her appraisingly. "Though I should warn you it won't be what you're used to. The school is little more than an abandoned church, and the children range from 6 to 16 with widely varying abilities." "I would welcome the opportunity," Victoria said, surprising herself with her eagerness. Eleanor nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Good. I'll spread the word that lessons can start next week. That should give you time to settle and prepare." She glanced toward the hill where the fresh grave was visible. "Gus told me about your brother. I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you," Victoria said softly. Eleanor turned to leave, then paused. "Gus Mackenzie is a good man, the best I know, but he carries his own burdens." Her eyes held Victoria's. "Just so you understand." Before Victoria could respond, Eleanor mounted her horse and rode away, leaving her to wonder what burdens August Mackenzie might be carrying, and why Eleanor had felt compelled to mention them. August returned late in the afternoon with supplies from town clothes, toiletries, and writing materials for Victoria, along with groceries and mail. His expression was grim as he unloaded his saddlebags. "Sheriff Daniels was too busy to take my report," he said, the quotation marks evident in his tone. "Said he'd look into it when he had time." "He won't do anything, will he?" Victoria asked. "No, but I expected that." August handed her a paper-wrapped package. "The dressmaker in town had these ready-made. They might need adjusting, but they'll do for now." Victoria accepted the package gratefully. "Eleanor Whitman came by while you were gone. She brought some things and mentioned the town needs a teacher." August's face brightened slightly. "Eleanor moves fast, but she's right, those children need education badly." He hesitated. "Would you consider it? At least temporarily." "I already told her yes," Victoria admitted. "I need to do something useful to earn my keep until I decide what comes next." August nodded approvingly. "It's settled then. You can stay here and ride into town for lessons. The ranch is closer to town than most of the outlying farms anyway, so the children can meet you there. Are you certain? I don't want to impose. You're not imposing if I'm offering, he interrupted. Besides, the house has been too quiet since. He stopped abruptly, as if he'd said more than intended. Victoria wanted to ask what he'd been about to say, but sensed it would be unwelcome. Instead, she changed the subject. Did you report what happened to anyone else? The stagecoach company, perhaps. I sent a telegram to the company. They'll notify the families of the driver and the other passenger. August began unpacking the groceries. I also put a notice in the newspaper about your brother, in case there's anyone back east who should know. The thoughtfulness of this action touched Victoria deeply. Thank you. There's no family left, but he had friends who would want to know. That evening, they ate a simple dinner of beans, cornbread, and coffee. Victoria, dressed now in one of the plain but serviceable dresses August had brought, felt almost human again. The acute edge of her grief had dulled slightly, replaced by the beginnings of practical concern for her future. Tell me about the children I'll be teaching, she said as they sat on the porch after dinner, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of pink and gold. August leaned back in his chair, stretching his long legs out before him. A mixed bunch. Ranchers' kids, miners' kids, shopkeepers' children. Some have had schooling before, others barely know their letters. They're good kids mostly, just rough around the edges. How many? 15 or so of school age. Not all will come regularly. Farm work and other chores often take precedence. Victoria nodded, mentally cataloging the challenges ahead. And supplies. Books, limited, August admitted. The last teacher left some materials behind, and Alina keeps what she can in stock at the general store, but you'll likely need to be creative. I can work with that, Victoria said, already forming plans. In some ways, it's not so different from teaching in Boston. Children are children everywhere. August smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face. You surprise me, Victoria Nicholls. Most Eastern ladies would be weeping with dismay at the prospect. I've done my weeping, she said softly, looking out at the darkening landscape. Now I need to find a way forward. They sat in companionable silence as the first stars appeared in the sky. Victoria found herself stealing glances at her rescuer, noticing the strong line of his jaw beneath his short beard, the tiny crinkles at the corners of his eyes that hinted at a capacity for laughter, despite his reserved demeanor. May I ask you something personal? She ventured finally. August tensed slightly but nodded. Alina mentioned that you carry burdens. What did she mean? The silence stretched so long that Victoria thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and controlled. I had a wife, Caroline, and a daughter, Lily. They died 3 years ago during a diphtheria outbreak that swept through the territory. He stared straight ahead, his profile rigid in the fading light. Lily was 5. Caroline was 28. I'm so sorry, Victoria whispered, understanding now why he had been so quick to offer help to a stranger in distress. He knew the landscape of loss intimately. It was a long time ago, August said, though his tone suggested the wounds were still fresh. Alina worries about me. She thinks I've been alone too long. Victoria didn't know how to respond to this revelation, sensing that any expression of sympathy would be unwelcome. Instead, she changed the subject. The books in your study you're quite well read for a rancher. A hint of a smile touched his lips. Does that surprise you? I wasn't always a rancher. I studied law back east before coming west. What brought you here? The same thing that brings most people, a chance for a new beginning. He stood abruptly. It's getting late. We both should rest. Victoria recognized the conversation was over. Of course. Thank you again for everything, August. He paused at the door. Gus. Everyone calls me Gus. Thank you, Gus, she amended, testing the familiar name on her tongue. He nodded once and disappeared inside, leaving Victoria alone with her thoughts and the vast, star-filled sky above. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Victoria spent her mornings helping with light chores around the ranch and preparing lesson plans for her future students. In the afternoons, Gus taught her to ride, starting with gentle circuits of the corral on the bay mare, whom she learned was called Daisy. "You're a natural," he told her on the third day as she successfully guided Daisy through a series of turns. "Most city folks take weeks to get comfortable in the saddle," Victoria laughed, exhilarated by her progress. "I think Daisy deserves most of the credit. She's very patient with me." "She knows a good soul when she meets one," Gus replied, his eyes lingering on her flushed face a moment longer than necessary before he turned away to adjust Daisy's bridle. These small moments of connection between them were becoming more frequent, a lingering glance, a brush of hands as they passed dishes at dinner, conversations that stretched late into the evening. Victoria found herself looking forward to these interactions, even as she reminded herself that her situation was temporary. Eventually, she would need to establish her independence, find her own place in this new world. But for now, she was content to learn from Gus not just riding, but the practical knowledge needed to survive in this harsh but beautiful territory. He showed her how to identify edible plants, how to tell direction by the sun and stars, how to spot signs of approaching weather changes. "Knowledge keeps you alive out here," he told her as they rode along the edge of his property one afternoon. "The desert doesn't forgive mistakes." "You sound like you learned that lesson the hard way," Victoria observed. Gus's expression tightened. "I did. When I first came west, I was as green as they come. Thought book learning would see me through." He gestured to a scar that ran along his forearm. "A rattlesnake taught me otherwise my first month here." "What made you stay, after such a harsh welcome?" He was quiet for so long that Victoria thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "The honesty of it. Back east, danger comes dressed in fine clothes and polite words. Out here it shows its teeth plainly. I prefer knowing my enemy's face." There was a story behind those words, Victoria was certain, but she didn't press. Gus would share more when he was ready, if he ever was. As the day of her first school lesson approached, Victoria's anticipation grew. Gus rode with her into Skidoo to show her the schoolhouse and introduce her to more of the townspeople. The settlement was smaller than she had imagined, a single main street lined with false-fronted buildings, a few side streets with modest homes, and scattered outlying farms and ranches. The schoolhouse, as Alina had warned, was little more than an abandoned church. The pews had been replaced with rough-hewn desks and benches, and a chalkboard hung at the front. But the windows were large and let in plenty of light, and someone had made an effort to clean the place thoroughly. "It's not what you're used to," Gus said apologetically as Victoria examined the limited supply of books and materials stored in a cabinet. "It will do nicely," she assured him, already envisioning how she would arrange the space. "The children are what matter, not the building." As they walked down the main street toward Alina's store, curious gazes followed them. Victoria was acutely aware of being a novelty, a new face in a place where strangers were rare and often unwelcome. "Don't mind them," Gus murmured, noticing her discomfort. "News travels fast in small towns, and you're the most interesting thing to happen here in months." "What are they saying about me?" Victoria asked, genuinely curious. "That you're brave to stay after what happened. That you must be special to have caught my attention." A flush crept up his neck as he realized what he'd revealed. "People talk nonsense when they're bored. Victoria felt her own cheeks warm, but decided to spare him further embarrassment by changing the subject. Eleanor mentioned something about payment for teaching. How does that work? Parents pay what they can, sometimes money, sometimes goods or services. It's not formal, but everyone contributes according to their means. Gus hesitated. It won't make you wealthy, but combined with room and board at the ranch, you should be comfortable enough. The arrangement suited Victoria fine. Money had never been her primary concern, even before losing everything in the attack. The opportunity to be useful, to build something worthwhile in this new place, was far more valuable to her. They stopped at the general store, where Eleanor greeted them warmly and introduced Victoria to her husband, Harold, a jovial man with an impressive mustache. The store was well stocked for a frontier establishment, with everything from canned goods to fabric, tools, and medicines. "We've spread the word about school starting Monday," Eleanor told them. "Expect at least a dozen children to show up, maybe more if the weather holds good for travel." "I'll be ready," Victoria promised, selecting a few additional supplies for her lessons. As they prepared to leave, Eleanor pulled Victoria aside while Gus discussed cattle prices with Harold. "You're staying out at the ranch," she said, her tone making it more statement than question. "Yes, until I can arrange something more permanent," Victoria replied carefully, sensing this was more than casual conversation. Eleanor studied her face. "Gus Mackenzie hasn't shown interest in anyone since losing Caroline and Lily, not once in 3 years. Her expression softened. "I've known that man since he first came to this territory, green as spring grass and twice as stubborn. I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." Victoria felt her heart quicken. "I'm sure you're mistaken. He's simply being kind to someone in need." "Am I?" Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "Just be careful with him. His heart broke clean in two when they died. If it breaks again, I doubt there'd be anything left to mend." Before Victoria could respond, Gus rejoined them, and the moment for confidences passed. But Eleanor's words stayed with Victoria as they rode back to the ranch, making her acutely conscious of the man riding beside her and the complex emotions he stirred within her. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Victoria found herself studying Gus's profile. The strong line of his jaw, the way his hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck, the tiny scar near his right eyebrow. He had become familiar to her in such a short time, yet remained in many ways a mystery. "What are you thinking about so intently?" Gus asked, catching her gaze. Victoria considered deflecting but decided on honesty. "You, actually. I realize I know very little about your life before you came west." Gus shifted in his chair, looking out at the darkening landscape. "Not much to tell. Born in New York. Father was a lawyer, expected me to follow in his footsteps. I did for a while. But it didn't suit you. The law suited me fine. It was the politics and compromise I couldn't stomach." His voice held an edge she hadn't heard before. "I believed justice should be blind, not bought and paid for by whoever had the deepest pockets. So you left, eventually, after a case went badly wrong." He fell silent, clearly unwilling to elaborate. "I drifted west, worked odd jobs until I saved enough to buy this place. Met Caroline in Skidoo. She was the doctor's daughter." A small smile touched his lips at the memory. "Smartest woman I ever knew. She could diagnose ailments faster than her father and had a better bedside manner to boot." Victoria could hear the love in his voice and something else, not just grief, but pride. "She sounds remarkable." She was. Gus's gaze remained fixed on the distant mountains. "She chose this life, chose me, even though she could have had an easier path. Never complained, not even when Lily came and things got tight for a while." "And Lily, what was she like?" Victoria asked gently, Now Gus did look at her, his eyes soft with memory. Curious about everything, always asking questions that would tie you in knots. She had her mother's brains and my stubbornness, a dangerous combination. He chuckled, the sound rusty with disuse. She used to sit right where you are now and make me tell her stories about the stars. Victoria could picture it clearly, a small girl with Gus's blue eyes, demanding tales of the heavens from her adoring father. You must miss them terribly. Every day, he admitted quietly. But lately, it's been different. The pain is still there, but it's not all there is anymore. He met her eyes directly. I have you to thank for some of that, Victoria. The simple honesty of his words touched her deeply. I've done nothing special. You've brought life back to this place. I didn't realize how silent it had become until you filled it with your voice, your questions, your presence. Gus leaned forward, his gaze intent. I want you to know that you're welcome here for as long as you wish to stay. Not out of charity or obligation, but because having you here makes this place feel like home again. Victoria felt tears prick her eyes at his words. Thank you for saying that. I felt so adrift since Thomas died, but being here with you, she broke off, suddenly aware of how much she was revealing. Gus reached across the space between them and took her hand. His palm was warm and calloused against her smoother skin. You don't have to decide anything now. Just know that you have a place here if you want it. The weight of his words hung in the air between them, full of unspoken possibilities. Victoria knew he was offering more than just a place to stay, though neither of them was ready to name it yet. I should turn in, she said finally, gently withdrawing her hand. Tomorrow's a big day. Gus nodded, understanding her need for space. Good night, Victoria. Good night, Gus, she replied, pausing at the door to look back at him, silhouetted against the starry sky. For the first time since the attack, Victoria felt a sense of belonging, of rightness. Whatever the future held, she was exactly where she needed to be at this moment. Monday dawned clear and cool, perfect weather for the first day of school. Victoria dressed carefully in her best new dress, a serviceable navy blue with white collar and cuffs, and arranged her hair in a simple but neat style. She wanted to make a good impression on her students and their parents. Gus had insisted on riding with her to the schoolhouse, just to make sure everything's in order, though Victoria suspected he simply wanted to offer moral support. His quiet confidence in her abilities had bolstered her own, helping to calm the butterflies in her stomach as they approached the town. To Victoria's surprise, a small crowd had gathered outside the schoolhouse, parents and children, dressed in their Sunday best despite it being Monday morning. Alina waved from the steps, where she stood with a bell in her hand. Quite a turnout, Gus murmured as he helped Victoria dismount. Looks like the whole town is here. Indeed, it seemed most of Skidoo's families had come to witness the opening of their school. Victoria counted at least 15 children of various ages, from tiny ones barely old enough for lessons to gangly teenagers trying to look unimpressed. Alina approached with a warm smile. Everyone wanted to welcome you properly, Miss Nicholls. We haven't had a proper teacher in so long. It's quite an occasion. Victoria was touched by the gesture. Thank you all for coming. I promise to do my very best for your children. A man stepped forward. Victoria recognized him as the town's mayor, whom she had met briefly during her previous visit. Miss Nicholls, on behalf of Skidoo, we want to express our gratitude for taking on this important role. Education is the foundation of our community's future. There was a smattering of applause, and Victoria felt her cheeks flush. I'm honored by your trust. Shall we begin? Alina rang the bell, its clear tone echoing through the morning air. Parents hugged their children and offered final admonishments to behave, while the older students shuffled their feet impatiently. Victoria caught Gus's eye as she prepared to enter the schoolhouse. He gave her a small nod of encouragement, his eyes warm with pride. That first day was chaotic but exhilarating. Victoria quickly assessed her students' varying abilities and divided them into groups, setting the older children to help the younger ones while she moved between them. By noon, she had learned all their names and had a clearer picture of the challenges ahead. The children were bright and eager, if untamed. They had practical knowledge that would have amazed her Boston pupils. They could calculate the cost of grain for livestock in their heads, identify dozens of plants and their uses, and recite complex cattle brands from memory. But many struggled with basic reading, and their knowledge of history, geography, and science was limited at best. When the final bell rang at 3 o'clock, Victoria was exhausted but elated. The children filed out, some lingering to ask questions or show her treasures from their pockets: interesting rocks, a bird's feather, a piece of fool's gold. She was straightening the classroom when Gus appeared in the doorway. "How did it go?" he asked, leaning against the frame with casual grace. "Wonderfully," Victoria replied, unable to keep the enthusiasm from her voice. "They're remarkable children. Rough around the edges, certainly, but so eager to learn. Did you know Abigail Thompson can recite multiplication tables up to 12 times 12, but has never read a novel? And young Michael Porter has a natural talent for drawing I've rarely seen in a child so young." Gus smiled at her excitement. "Sounds like they've found the right teacher." "I hope so." Victoria gathered her materials. "There's so much I want to teach them, Gus. Not just reading and figures, but poetry, science, history. They deserve a true education, not just the rudiments. If anyone can give them that, it's you." His faith in her was unwavering. "Ready to head home? I thought we might stop by the creek on the way. It's a special place, especially this time of year." The casual way he said "home" warmed Victoria's heart. In just 2 weeks, the ranch had indeed become home to her in a way she wouldn't have thought possible. And the prospect of spending time alone with Gus, away from the prying eyes of the town, was undeniably appealing. "I'd like that," she said, gathering her shawl. They rode side by side out of town, nodding to townspeople as they passed. Victoria was conscious of the curious glances that followed them, the speculation in people's eyes as they watched Gus Mackenzie and the new schoolteacher together. Once beyond the town limits, Gus led her off the main trail onto a narrower path that wound through stands of scrub oak and pine. The terrain grew more rugged, with rocky outcroppings and sudden dips that would have terrified Victoria just a week ago. Now, confident in both her own abilities and Daisy's sure-footedness, she enjoyed the challenge. "Just ahead," Gus called over his shoulder as they rounded a bend. Victoria gasped as the creek came into view. Unlike the dry, dusty landscape they'd been traversing, here was an oasis of green. The creek bubbled over smooth stones, creating a series of small pools bordered by lush grass and wildflowers. Ancient cottonwoods provided dappled shade, their leaves rustling gently in the breeze. "It's beautiful," Victoria breathed as Gus helped her dismount. "Not many people know about this spot," he said, tethering their horses where they could drink from the clear water. "It's fed by an underground spring that keeps it flowing even in the driest months." They settled on a flat rock beside one of the pools, where tiny fish darted in the sun-dappled water. The air was fragrant with wildflowers and the clean, sharp scent of the pines. "Caroline and I used to bring Lily here for picnics," Gus said, surprising Victoria with the voluntary mention of his family. "She loved watching the fish, said they were having secret meetings under the rocks." Victoria smiled at the childish fancy. Children have such wonderful imaginations. Today, Sarah Miller told me she believes the mountains are really sleeping giants who might wake up someday. Smart girl, Gus chuckled. Out here, that doesn't seem so far-fetched. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the murmur of the creek and the occasional call of a bird. Victoria found herself studying Gus's profile again, noticing how relaxed he seemed in this place, as if the weight he habitually carried had temporarily lifted. "Thank you for bringing me here," she said finally, "for sharing this with me." Gus turned to look at her, his blue eyes intent. "I haven't brought anyone here since they died. It felt wrong somehow, as if I was betraying their memory." He picked up a small stone and turned it over in his fingers. "But being here with you today feels right, like they would approve." Victoria's heart quickened at his words. "I'm honored, truly." "Victoria," Gus began, then hesitated. "These past 2 weeks, having you at the ranch, riding together, talking in the evenings, it's made me realize how much I've been missing. Not just companionship, but purpose beyond just surviving day to day." "I've felt it too," she admitted quietly. "When Thomas died, I thought my world had ended. I couldn't imagine finding joy again or belonging. But you've shown me it's possible to rebuild, to find new meaning." Gus reached for her hand, his touch gentle but sure. "I don't want to rush you. I know you're still grieving, still finding your way in this new life. But I need you to know that my feelings for you have grown beyond friendship or simple concern." Victoria felt a flutter of both fear and excitement at his declaration. "Gus, you don't need to say anything now," he interrupted gently. "I just wanted you to know where I stand. Whatever you decide about your future, whether it includes me or not, you have my support." The generosity of his stance moved her deeply. Here was a man who had known terrible loss, yet remained capable of offering his heart again, with no guarantees of its safekeeping. The courage that required humbled her. "My feelings for you have grown as well," Victoria said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "But you're right, I'm still finding my way. Can we give ourselves time? To be sure." Gus's face lit with a smile that transformed him. "We have all the time in the world, Victoria. I'm not going anywhere." As if to seal this tentative understanding between them, he lifted her hand and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. The simple gesture sent warmth cascading through Victoria's body. They remained by the creek until the lengthening shadows reminded them of the approaching evening. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, but the silence was rich with unspoken possibilities, with the promise of a future that neither had dared imagine just weeks before. The following weeks fell into a pattern that brought Victoria increasing joy. Weekdays were devoted to her students, whose progress exceeded her most optimistic hopes. Evenings and weekends belonged to the ranch, to Gus, to the gradual deepening of their connection. Victoria's confidence grew daily, both as a teacher and as a woman making her way in this new world. She learned to ride with skill and even some grace, to identify the plants and animals of the region, to predict weather changes by the feel of the air and the behavior of the wildlife. The fragile, grief-stricken woman who had arrived at the ranch that terrible day was being replaced by someone stronger, more resilient, more alive. Gus watched this transformation with undisguised admiration. True to his word, he never pressured Victoria for declarations or commitments, content to let their relationship evolve at its own pace. But his feelings were evident in countless small gestures, the way he listened intently when she spoke of her day, the books he brought her from his trips to larger towns, the wildflowers he sometimes left on the breakfast table before she woke. One evening in late October, as they sat before the fire in the main room of the ranch house, Victoria found herself watching Gus as he read aloud from Tennyson's Ulysses. His deep voice gave the words a resonance that made her heart ache with their beauty and truth. To strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield, he read, then closed the book gently. What are you thinking? He asked, catching her intent gaze. That I'm falling in love with you, Victoria answered simply, the words coming unbidden but feeling entirely right. Gus went very still, his eyes never leaving hers. Are you certain? Victoria nodded, suddenly shy but determined to speak her heart. I've been certain for weeks, I think. I just needed to be brave enough to say it aloud. In one fluid motion, Gus moved to kneel before her chair, taking both her hands in his. Victoria Nicholls, I have loved you since that day at the creek, maybe even before, but I was afraid to hope you might someday feel the same. I do, she whispered. I love you, Gus Mackenzie. He reached up to cup her face with one calloused hand, his touch infinitely tender. May I kiss you? Victoria's answer was to lean forward, closing the distance between them. His lips met hers with gentle reverence that quickly deepened into something more urgent, more passionate. She felt herself melting into him, her arms winding around his neck as he pulled her closer. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily. Gus rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed as if savoring the moment. I never thought I would feel this way again, he murmured. After Caroline and Lily died, I believed that part of me had died with them. Victoria stroked his face gently. They will always be part of you, Gus. Loving me doesn't diminish what you had with them. He opened his eyes, gazing at her with wonder. How did you become so wise? I had an excellent teacher, she replied with a small smile. A certain rancher who showed me it was possible to find strength even when I thought I had none left. Gus kissed her again, more deeply this time, and Victoria lost herself in the sensation. This was what coming home felt like. She realized not a place, but a person who saw you completely and loved you anyway. The news of their courtship spread quickly through Skidoo, met with general approval and not a little self-congratulation from those, like Alina, who had seen it coming from the start. Victoria found herself the recipient of knowing smiles and good-natured teasing from her students' parents, while Gus endured similar treatment from his ranch hands and business associates. You'd think they'd arranged it all themselves, Gus grumbled good-naturedly after a particularly pointed comment from Harold Whitman about finally coming to his senses. They care about you, Victoria pointed out as they rode home from town. About us. It's rather sweet, really. Gus's expression softened. I suppose it is. This town has been good to me, even at my worst. After I lost Caroline and Lily, I wasn't fit company for man nor beast for a long while, but they never gave up on me. As winter approached, bringing cooler temperatures and occasional rain to the parched landscape, Victoria and Gus's relationship deepened further. They spoke often of the future now, making plans that increasingly included we rather than I. Victoria continued teaching, her small classroom now boasting proper desks, donated by a grateful parent who was also the town's carpenter, and a growing library thanks to Gus's frequent trips to larger settlements. Her students thrived under her guidance, their progress a source of pride for the entire community. At the ranch, Victoria had gradually assumed the role of mistress of the house, her touch evident in small improvements, curtains at the windows, flowers on the table when available, her books mingling with Gus's on the shelves. The ranch hands, initially wary of the Eastern lady in their midst, had come to respect her determination and willingness to learn their ways. It was Miguel who first noticed the riders approaching one crisp November afternoon. Victoria was in the yard, hanging laundry while Gus repaired a fence in the nearby corral. At Miguel's shout of warning, Gus was instantly alert, moving to Victoria's side with his hand on his holstered gun. "Get in the house," he said quietly, his eyes fixed on the distant riders. "Who is it?" Victoria asked, making no move to leave. "Can't be sure, but there are 4 of them." The significance of the number wasn't lost on either of them. The Blackwell gang always rode as a foursome. Victoria felt fear clutch at her heart, memories of that terrible day on the trail suddenly vivid again. "The bandits who killed Thomas, maybe, stay behind me." Gus motioned to Frank and Miguel, who had armed themselves and taken positions near the barn. The riders approached slowly, deliberately. As they came closer, Victoria could make out details: 4 men, dusty from the trail, their faces partially obscured by bandanas pulled up against the dust. The leader rode slightly ahead, a tall man on a distinctive black horse. They stopped at the edge of the yard, just beyond easy shooting distance. The leader raised a hand in what might have been greeting or warning. "Mackenzie," he called, "we have business to discuss." Gus's stance remained rigid, his hand never leaving his gun. "State your business from there, Blackwell." So it was them. Victoria felt a surge of anger and grief at the confirmation. These were the men who had killed her brother, who had left her for dead on that lonely trail. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "Heard you've been asking questions about a stagecoach robbery a couple months back," Blackwell called. "Thought we might clear the air." "There's nothing to clear," Gus replied, his voice hard. "You killed 3 innocent people and stole their belongings. The law will deal with you." Blackwell laughed, a harsh sound that carried clearly across the yard. "The law? You mean Daniels. He's been taking our money for years to look the other way. Why do you think we operate so freely in this territory?" The revelation didn't seem to surprise Gus, confirming Victoria's suspicion that the corruption of the local sheriff was an open secret. "What do you want, Blackwell?" Gus demanded. "To make a deal. We know the lady there survived." Blackwell gestured toward Victoria. "She's the only witness who could identify us to authorities beyond Daniels's reach." Victoria stepped forward, ignoring Gus's attempt to keep her behind him. "You murdered my brother," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "What possible deal could you offer that would make me forget that?" Blackwell studied her with cold eyes. "We have something that belongs to you. A locket. Gold with roses engraved on it. Your brother died trying to keep it from us." Victoria gasped. Her mother's locket, the last connection to her family back east, containing miniature portraits of both her parents. She had mourned its loss almost as much as Thomas's death. "Here's the deal," Blackwell continued. "You keep quiet about what you saw that day. We return the locket and leave you in peace. You talk to any lawman outside of Skidoo, we'll be back, and next time, we won't be interested in making deals." Gus's voice was deadly quiet. "You're threatening her on my property." "Just stating facts," Blackwell replied coolly. "What's it to be, miss? Your precious keepsake and a peaceful life, or holding on to a grudge that'll only bring you more grief?" Victoria felt a strange calm descend over her. The choice was clear, had been from the moment she recognized these men. "I want justice for my brother," she said clearly. "Keep the locket. Its value is nothing compared to Thomas's life." Blackwell's expression hardened. "You're making a mistake, lady." "The only mistake was thinking I could be bought with a trinket, however precious." Victoria stood tall beside Gus, drawing strength from his presence. "Leave now, or face the consequences." Blackwell's hand moved toward his gun, but Gus was faster. In one smooth motion, he drew and fired a warning shot that kicked up dust just in front of the black horse's hooves. The animal reared, nearly unseating its rider. "Next one won't miss," Gus promised, his aim steady. "You're outnumbered and outgunned. Frank and Miguel have rifles trained on you from the barn, and I never missed twice. Tension crackled in the air as Blackwell considered his options. Finally, he backed his nervous horse a few steps. "This isn't over, Mackenzie. For today it is," Gus replied evenly. "Ride out now and don't come back." With a final threatening glare, Blackwell wheeled his horse around. His companions followed suit, and the 4 riders galloped away, dust billowing in their wake. Victoria let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her knees felt suddenly weak, and she swayed slightly where she stood. Gus was immediately at her side, his arm around her waist supporting her. "Let's get you inside." Once in the house, Victoria sank into a chair, trembling now as the adrenaline ebbed. "They'll be back, won't they?" Gus knelt before her, his hands clasping hers. "Probably, but we'll be ready." His expression was grim but determined. "You were incredibly brave out there, Victoria." "I didn't feel brave," she admitted. "I felt terrified, but I couldn't let them think they could buy my silence, that Thomas's life meant so little. I understand." Gus's eyes were tender as he brushed a strand of hair from her face. "But now we need to make plans. It's not just about catching them anymore, it's about keeping you safe." That evening, after Frank and Miguel had been stationed as guards and the house secured, Gus and Victoria sat at the kitchen table discussing their options. "We could go to the federal marshal in Tucson," Gus suggested. "If Daniels is corrupt, we need to go over his head." "Tucson is a week's ride," Victoria pointed out. "Blackwell could come back before then." "True." Gus looked troubled. "We could send for the marshal, but there's no guarantee he'd come based on a telegram alone." Victoria considered for a moment. "What about gathering evidence against Daniels? If we could prove he's in league with the Blackwell gang, maybe other townspeople would stand with us." "It's risky," Gus warned. "Daniels has friends in town, people who benefit from looking the other way, and confronting him directly could provoke Blackwell into action sooner." Victoria reached across the table to take his hand. "I won't live in fear, Gus. These men took my brother from me. I won't let them take my future too." Gus's expression softened with pride and concern. "We'll face this together then. Tomorrow, I'll ride into town and send telegrams to the federal marshal and the territorial governor. We'll also speak with people we trust, Alina and Harold, the mayor, a few others. We need allies." "And tonight?" Victoria asked, unable to completely hide her nervousness. Gus squeezed her hand. "Tonight I'll keep watch. No one will harm you while I'm alive, Victoria, I promise you that." The sincerity in his voice brought tears to her eyes. "I know. That's what frightens me most, the thought of you putting yourself in danger for me." "Not just for you," Gus corrected gently. "For us. For the future we're building together." Victoria looked at him, this man who had saved her in more ways than one, who had shown her strength she hadn't known she possessed. In that moment, her decision crystallized. "Marry me, Gus," she said, the words spilling out before she could reconsider. Gus's eyes widened in surprise. "Victoria, I know it's sudden and perhaps inappropriate for me to ask rather than you, but I don't want to wait." Victoria tightened her grip on his hand. "I love you. Whatever comes next, I want to face it as your wife." Gus rose from his chair and pulled her to her feet into his arms. "Yes," he said simply. "Nothing would make me happier than to have you as my wife." He kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, as if sealing their pact against whatever dangers lay ahead. When they finally parted, both were breathless but certain. "Tomorrow," Gus said. "We'll go to town, speak to the preacher, and be married before we take on Blackwell and Daniels. If anything happens to me—" "Don't say that," Victoria interrupted fiercely. "If anything happens," Gus continued gently, "you'll be my legal wife with rights to the ranch and everything I own. It's practical as well as what my heart desires." Victoria couldn't argue with his logic, though the thought of losing him now was unbearable. "Tomorrow, then." That night, Despite the threat hanging over them, Victoria felt a curious peace. Whatever came next, she would face it with Gus at her side, bound together not just by love but by the formal ties of marriage. It wasn't how she had imagined her wedding, but in a strange way it felt perfectly right, a declaration of hope in the face of danger, of life continuing despite death's shadow. Dawn brought clear skies and a crisp freshness to the air. Victoria dressed in her best blue dress, the same one she had worn on her first day of teaching, while Gus donned a clean shirt and his least worn trousers. They were simple clothes for a wedding, but neither cared about appearances. Frank and Miguel insisted on accompanying them to town as protection, riding ahead and behind their wagon with rifles at the ready. The journey passed without incident, though Victoria was acutely aware of every shadow, every distant movement that might signal danger. Skidoo was quiet in the early morning, only a few shopkeepers sweeping their boardwalks as the wagon rolled down the main street. Their first stop was the telegraph office, where Gus sent urgent messages to both the federal marshal and the territorial governor, detailing the corruption of Sheriff Daniels and the threats made by the Blackwell gang. Next, they visited Reverend Potter, the town's minister, whose surprise at their request for an immediate wedding quickly gave way to understanding when they explained the situation. "Of course I'll marry you today," he assured them. "The church is always open for such blessed occasions, even under difficult circumstances." Word spread quickly, as it always did in small towns. By the time Victoria and Gus arrived at the church, 2 hours later, having gathered what allies they could, a small crowd had assembled to witness the ceremony. Eleanor and Harold Whitman were there, along with the mayor and his wife, several parents of Victoria's students, and even a few of the older children who had slipped away from their chores. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. Victoria would later remember little of the formal words, but the look in Gus's eyes as he promised to love and protect her, "until death do us part," was etched into her memory forever. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, the small congregation burst into applause and cheers, a moment of joy amid the tension of their situation. "Mrs. Mackenzie," Gus murmured as he kissed her, his lips curved in a smile against hers. "Mr. Mackenzie," she returned, her heart so full it felt it might burst. The celebration afterward was impromptu but heartfelt. Eleanor had somehow managed to produce a small cake, and Harold brought a bottle of good whiskey from the store's special reserve. Toasts were offered, congratulations extended, and for a few precious hours, the threat hanging over them receded, but reality could not be held at bay indefinitely. As the afternoon wore on, Gus gathered their closest allies, Harold, the mayor, and 2 ranchers known for their marksmanship and integrity, to discuss strategy. The telegraph operator expects replies from the marshal and governor by tomorrow at the latest, Gus informed them. "In the meantime, we need to be prepared for Blackwell to make good on his threats. And Daniels," Harold added grimly, "if he learns you've sent those telegrams, he'll move against you before help can arrive." "My ranch is defensible, but I don't want to put Victoria at risk," Gus said, his expression troubled. "I'm considering sending her to Tucson with an escort." "No," Victoria interjected firmly. All eyes turned to her. "I'm not leaving. This is my fight as much as yours, Gus. Thomas was my brother. I'm the witness who can identify Blackwell and his men. Sending me away solves nothing." The men exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with the idea of a woman in potential danger, but Victoria stood her ground. "I'm not the same helpless person who arrived here 3 months ago. I've learned to shoot, to ride, to spot danger, and more importantly, I've learned that running from trouble only means it follows you with greater determination." Gus's expression was a mixture of pride and concern. "Victoria, I'm your wife now," she reminded him softly. "Where you stand, I stand, together." After a moment, Gus nodded, accepting her decision. "Together then, but we take every precaution." The plan they devised was straightforward: return to the ranch, which offered better defensive positions than remaining in town, and prepare for either Blackwell's return or news from the authorities. Harold and several other townsmen would ride out with them for additional protection, staying at least until they knew whether help was coming from outside. As they prepared to leave town, Victoria was approached by several of her students, led by 12-year-old Sarah Miller, the girl with the vivid imagination. "Miss Nicholls, I mean Mrs. Mackenzie," Sarah corrected herself with a shy smile. "We wanted to give you this." She handed Victoria a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. "It's a wedding present from all of us." Touched by the gesture, Victoria unwrapped the package to find a beautifully crafted journal, its cover embossed with her new initials, VM. "For your stories and poems," Sarah explained. "You're always telling us how important it is to write down our thoughts and experiences." Victoria hugged the girl, blinking back tears. "It's perfect, thank you all." As they drove out of town, the wagon now accompanied by 6 riders in addition to Frank and Miguel, Victoria clutched the journal in her lap. It represented everything she had come to value about her new life: the connections she'd formed, the community that had embraced her, the future she was building with Gus. She would not allow Blackwell or anyone else to threaten that future. The ranch was quiet when they arrived, no sign of unwelcome visitors. Nevertheless, Gus organized their defenders with military precision, assigning watch positions and establishing signals. The house itself was secured, shutters closed and barred, extra ammunition distributed to those who would remain inside if trouble came. Night fell with no disturbance, but sleep was elusive for most. Victoria and Gus sat at the kitchen table long after the others had settled into makeshift beds around the house and barn. "Are you afraid?" Gus asked quietly, watching her face in the lamplight. Victoria considered the question honestly. "Yes, but not in the way I was before. This isn't the same fear I felt when Thomas was killed, that helpless terror of having no control, no choices." She reached for his hand. "Now I'm afraid of what might be lost, but I know whatever happens, I've made my own decisions, chosen my own path." Gus brought her hand to his lips. "I wish I could have spared you this. Your first day as my wife should have been filled with joy, not preparations for battle." "There will be many days ahead for joy," Victoria assured him. "And I wouldn't change anything about today. Marrying you was the most meaningful choice I've ever made." They were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. Harold entered, his expression grave. "Rider coming in from town. It's the telegraph operator's boy." Gus was immediately alert. "Bring him in." The boy, no more than 15, was dusty from his hard ride but triumphant as he handed Gus a yellow telegram form. "Mr. Phillips said to get this to you right away, Mr. Mackenzie. Said it's urgent." Gus tipped the boy generously before unfolding the telegram. He read it quickly, his expression changing from tension to cautious relief. "The federal marshal is already on his way," he told Victoria and Harold. "Apparently, there have been other complaints about Daniels. He should arrive within 2 days with a contingent of deputies." "That's good news," Harold said, "but it still leaves us vulnerable tomorrow." "We'll maintain our guard," Gus agreed. "Blackwell may not know help is coming, but Daniels might, especially if he has friends at the telegraph office." They sent the boy back to town with thanks and instructions to tell no one about the marshal's imminent arrival. Then they settled in for what promised to be a long night. Dawn broke without incident, but the heightened vigilance continued. Victoria insisted on taking her turn at watch, positioned at an upstairs window with a clear view of the approach to the ranch. Gus had taught her to shoot in the weeks since her arrival, and though she was far from expert, she could hit what she aimed at from a reasonable distance. Mid-morning brought the first sign of trouble, a cloud of dust on the horizon, moving steadily toward the ranch. Gus joined Victoria at the window, his spyglass trained on the distant riders. 6 of them, he reported grimly. Blackwell, his usual 3, and 2 others including Daniels. Victoria's heart sank at the confirmation of the sheriff's corruption. What now? We stick to the plan. Our position is defensible and we outnumber them. They'll try to talk first, threaten, maybe offer deals. Gus's jaw was set in determination. We just need to hold out until the marshal arrives. The riders stopped at the same distance Blackwell had maintained on his previous visit. This time, it was Daniels who called out, his voice carrying across the yard with false bonhomie. "Mackenzie, I hear there's been some trouble. Why don't you come out so we can discuss it like civilized men?" Gus stepped onto the porch, making sure to stay within the protective coverage of their armed defenders. Victoria stood just inside the doorway, rifle in hand. "Nothing to discuss, Daniels," Gus called back. "Unless you're here to arrest Blackwell and his men for murder and robbery." Daniels's friendly demeanor slipped slightly. "Now, Mackenzie, you know accusations like that require proof. The lady's word alone isn't enough to convict anyone." "Her word will be enough for the federal marshal," Gus replied. "He's already on his way, Daniels, due tomorrow with enough deputies to clean up this entire territory." The announcement had its intended effect. Daniels went pale while Blackwell cursed audibly. The other riders shifted nervously in their saddles. "You're bluffing," Daniels said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Check with the telegraph office if you don't believe me," Gus suggested. "Though I suspect Phillips may have already mentioned the telegrams to you." Daniels and Blackwell conferred briefly, their expressions growing more agitated. Finally, Blackwell spurred his horse forward a few steps. "Last chance, Mackenzie. Send the woman out to us and the rest of you can ride away. Otherwise, we burn this place to the ground with all of you inside." Victoria stepped onto the porch beside Gus, ignoring his attempt to keep her back. "I'm not coming with you, Blackwell, and you're not burning anything today." As if to punctuate her defiance, Harold and the other defenders emerged from their hiding places around the property, rifles trained on the intruders. The odds, already in their favor, now became visibly clear to Daniels and his companions. "You're outnumbered," Gus stated flatly, "and outgunned. Ride away now and you might have time to clear out before the marshal arrives. Stay and you'll hang for murder and corruption." Daniels's nerve broke first. "This is madness, Blackwell. I didn't sign up for a war." He wheeled his horse around. "I'm heading for the border. You can do what you want." For a moment, it seemed Blackwell might choose to fight despite the odds. His hand hovered near his gun, his face twisted with rage and frustration. But self-preservation ultimately won out. With a final venomous glare at Victoria and Gus, he signaled to his men, and they turned to follow Daniels. "Don't think this is over," Blackwell shouted as they rode away. "We'll find you eventually, and when we do," his threat was cut short by a warning shot from Gus's rifle, kicking up dirt near his horse's hooves. The bandits spurred their mounts to a gallop, disappearing in a cloud of dust. A cheer went up from their defenders as the danger receded. Victoria sagged against Gus, suddenly exhausted as the tension of the confrontation drained away. "You think they're really gone?" she asked. Gus kept his arm around her waist, supporting her. "Daniels is. He knows his career is over, and he'll want to be far away when the marshal arrives." Blackwell might circle back if he thinks there's an opportunity, but I doubt he'll risk a direct assault now that he knows we're prepared." Victoria nodded, wanting to believe it was truly over but still wary. "We should maintain watches just in case." "Agreed," Gus said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You've been amazing, Mrs. Mackenzie, braver than anyone had a right to expect." Victoria looked up at him, this man who had taught her what true strength looked like, not the absence of fear, but the courage to face it. "I had a good example to follow." The rest of the day passed without incident, though they maintained their vigilance. By evening, most of their defenders had relaxed enough to enjoy a celebratory meal that Victoria and Alina prepared from the ranch's stores. "To the newest Mrs. Mackenzie," Harold toasted, raising his coffee cup since the whiskey had long since been depleted. "Who proved today that courage comes in all forms." "And to her husband," Alina added with a warm smile, "who finally found a woman worthy of his devotion." Gus, never comfortable with praise, nevertheless raised his cup to the toast, his eyes seeking Victoria's across the crowded table. The love and pride she saw there made her heart swell with happiness, despite the danger still hovering at the edges of their lives. Late that night, when the house had finally quieted and most of their defenders were sleeping, Victoria and Gus lay awake in their bedroom, speaking in hushed tones. "What happens after the marshal arrives?" Victoria asked, her head resting on Gus's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "He'll want your testimony about the stagecoach robbery," Gus replied, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her back. "And mine about Daniels's corruption. With luck, they'll track down Blackwell and his gang before they can flee the territory. And if they don't," Gus considered this carefully, "then we remain vigilant, but they'd be fools to return once the law is actively hunting them." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "I should feel only relief that they're gone, or satisfaction that justice might be done. But part of me still grieves for Thomas, for the future he'll never see." "That's natural," Gus assured her. "Grief doesn't end neatly just because a threat is removed or justice is served. It changes shape, becomes less acute with time, but it's always there, a part of who you are." Victoria recognized the wisdom born of his own losses. "Does it still hurt when you think of Caroline and Lily?" "Yes," he admitted, "but differently now. I can remember the joy of having them in my life without being consumed by the pain of losing them. And loving you doesn't diminish what I felt for them, it honors it, in a way. Caroline would have wanted me to find happiness again." Victoria raised herself on one elbow to look at him. "I wish I could have known them." "They would have liked you," Gus said with a small smile. "Caroline especially would have appreciated your determination and intelligence, and Lily would have been enchanted by your stories." "Tell me more about them," Victoria requested. "I want to know the people who made you who you are." As Gus spoke of his first family, Caroline's skill as a healer, Lily's infectious laugh, the life they had built together before illness took them, Victoria felt as if she was being granted entry to the most private chambers of his heart. It was a gift of trust that moved her deeply. "Thank you for sharing them with me," she said when he finally fell silent. "They will always be a part of our family, even though they're gone." Gus pulled her closer, his arms tightening around her. "Our family," he repeated softly. "I like the sound of that." "As do I," Victoria whispered, snuggling against him. Despite the uncertain future, she felt a profound sense of peace. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The federal marshal arrived the following afternoon with 4 deputies, their arrival signaling a definitive shift in the balance of power in Skidoo and the surrounding territory. Marshal James Cooper was a no-nonsense lawman with a reputation for incorruptibility and thoroughness. He listened carefully to Victoria's account of the stagecoach robbery and Thomas's murder, taking detailed notes and asking precise questions. "You'd make a good witness in court, Mrs. Mackenzie," he told her when she had finished. "Clear, specific, and unwavering in your identification." "Will there be a trial?" Victoria asked. "If we capture them, absolutely," Cooper assured her. "The territorial governor is particularly concerned about the pattern of stagecoach robberies and the apparent corruption of local law enforcement. He wants it ended, decisively." True to his word, Cooper wasted no time in organizing pursuit of Daniels and the Blackwell gang. 2 of his deputies were dispatched to each of the likely escape routes toward the Mexican border, while Cooper himself established temporary headquarters in Skidoo to coordinate the manhunt and investigate Daniels's corruption more thoroughly. For Victoria and Gus, the marshal's arrival meant a gradual return to normalcy. Their defenders returned to their homes and businesses, the heightened vigilance at the ranch relaxed, and Victoria resumed teaching in Skidoo. The story of their confrontation with Daniels and Blackwell spread throughout the territory, enhancing Gus's already solid reputation and establishing Victoria as a woman of remarkable courage. "People are calling you the schoolmarm sharpshooter," Alina told her with amused exasperation one afternoon at the general store. "Never mind that you didn't actually shoot anyone." Victoria laughed at the absurdity of the nickname. "I'm glad I didn't have to." "But I would have, to protect our home and the people I love." "I don't doubt it for a moment," Alina replied, her expression turning serious. "You know, when Gus first brought you to the ranch, half the town thought you wouldn't last a week." An Eastern lady, educated and refined, suddenly thrust into frontier life after such tragedy. She shook her head in wonder. "Yet here you are, not just surviving but thriving." "I had help," Victoria pointed out. "From Gus, from you, from this entire community." "Yes, but you had to be willing to accept that help, to learn and adapt. Not everyone can." Alina squeezed her hand affectionately. "I'm proud to call you my friend, Victoria Mackenzie." December brought news that both thrilled and relieved the entire community. Marshal Cooper's deputies had tracked down and captured Blackwell, and his remaining gang members attempting to cross into Mexico near Nogales. Daniels had already fled across the border, but Cooper was confident the Mexican authorities would eventually apprehend him based on the warrants and evidence of corruption. "They'll stand trial in Tucson next month," Cooper informed Gus and Victoria when he stopped by the ranch to deliver the news personally. "Your testimony will be crucial, Mrs. Mackenzie. Are you willing to travel there?" "Of course," Victoria replied without hesitation. "I want to see justice done for Thomas and the others they harmed." Cooper nodded approvingly. "The territorial governor asked me to convey his personal gratitude for your courage in standing against both the criminals and the corruption that protected them. Your actions have helped make this territory safer for everyone." After Cooper left, Victoria and Gus walked up to Thomas's grave on the hill, where they had placed a proper headstone just a week earlier. The view was spectacular in the clear winter light, the mountains etched sharply against the blue sky. "I think Thomas would be proud," Victoria said as they stood hand in hand before the grave. "Not just of standing against Blackwell, but of the life I'm building here." "He always believed the West offered opportunities that couldn't be found back east." "He was right about that," Gus agreed. "Though I suspect he was thinking more of gold mines and cattle empires than frontier schoolhouses." Victoria smiled, squeezing his hand. "Perhaps. But I've found riches here that have nothing to do with gold." She turned to face him, her expression suddenly serious. "I have something to tell you, Gus." His brow furrowed in concern. "What is it?" "I visited Dr. Reynolds yesterday, while you were meeting with the Cattlemen's Association." Victoria took a deep breath. I'm with child. We're going to have a baby." For a moment, Gus simply stared at her, shock evident in his expression. Then a smile broke across his face, so full of joy it transformed him. "A baby, you're certain?" Victoria nodded, her own eyes filling with happy tears. "The doctor says I'm about 6 weeks along. The baby should arrive in early summer." Gus pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet in his enthusiasm. "Victoria, my love, you have made me the happiest man in the territory." He set her down gently, suddenly concerned. "Are you feeling well? Should you be resting more?" She laughed at his sudden protectiveness. "I'm perfectly fine. Dr. Reynolds says I'm healthy and strong, and there's no reason to expect anything but a normal pregnancy. Still, we should be careful." Gus placed his hand reverently on her still flat abdomen. "A new life. After so much loss, it feels like a miracle." Victoria covered his hand with her own. "It is a miracle, one we've created together." They stood there on the hilltop, bathed in winter sunlight, filled with hope for the future they were building. The journey that had brought Victoria to this place had begun in tragedy and fear, but had transformed into something beautiful and lasting. "I'm not strong enough," she had whispered that terrible day on the trail, broken by grief and terror. "You don't have to be, I am," Gus had replied, offering his strength when she had none left. But the truth, Victoria now understood, was that strength came in many forms. Sometimes it was the courage to face armed bandits. Sometimes the determination to build a new life from the ashes of the old. Sometimes simply the will to get up each morning and face whatever the day might bring. And the greatest strength of all, perhaps, was knowing when to lean on others, to accept help and support, to build connections that could withstand the harsh realities of life on the frontier. As they walked back down the hill toward the ranch house, their home, Victoria felt the future stretching out before them, full of promise despite its inevitable challenges. The child growing within her would be born into a world very different from the Boston society she had known, but it would be a world rich with possibilities, with the freedom to forge one's own path. "What shall we name the baby?" Gus asked as they reached the yard, his arm protectively around her waist. Victoria considered. "If it's a boy, perhaps Thomas after my brother." She glanced up at him. "And if it's a girl, Caroline after your first wife. Would that be all right?" Gus's eyes grew suspiciously bright. "That would be more than all right. It would be perfect." That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Victoria opened the journal her students had given her as a wedding gift. She had been recording their story, preserving it for the child who would someday want to know how his or her parents had found each other against all odds. "What are you writing?" Gus asked, noticing her smile as the pencil moved across the page. "Our story," Victoria replied, looking up at the man who had become her heart's home. "So our child will know that even in the darkest moments, love can find a way forward. That strength isn't always about facing challenges alone, but about finding someone to share the burden." Gus leaned over to read what she had written, then pressed a gentle kiss to her temple. "A good story needs a title," he suggested. Victoria considered for a moment, then wrote at the top of the page, "When you don't have to be strong alone." "Perfect," Gus murmured, his arm tightening around her shoulders as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "Just like you." Victoria leaned into his embrace, content in the knowledge that whatever the future held, joy or sorrow, triumph or challenge, they would face it together, drawing strength from each other when their own faltered, building a life richer and more meaningful than either could have imagined alone. As night fell over the ranch, bringing with it the peaceful sounds of the desert and the promise of tomorrow, Victoria Mackenzie knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true home not in a place, but in the love of the man beside her and the family they were creating together.